Hi, I'm Emily, Outdoor School Director here at Twin Rocks Friends Camp. Today I am down at our freshwater lake called Spring Lake, and I hope you'll join me on a class that we call Wetland Wonders. Wetlands are the area where the land meets the water, and our wetlands here are filled with all kinds of grasses and shrubs and trees. Wetlands are a really important part of an ecosystem. It's because it's the area where the land meets the water. Wetlands serve as kind of a giant filter for water that's coming down out of a watershed, which is a watershed is where when water travels from a high place to a low place. So water comes down off of our hills and mountains here around camp, and it filters down into this lake. But the wetlands, the area before the lake, captures some of the debris or pollution that might be coming out of that water. So they are a really important part of an ecosystem. Now down here at the lake, we are going to be looking for some pretty cool creatures. We're going to be looking for things called aquatic macroinvertebrates. Now the word aquatic means living its life or part of its life in water. Macro means you can see it with just your eyes. You don't need a microscope. You can see it with just your bare eyes. And an invertebrate is a creature that doesn't have a backbone. So mostly we're looking for insect-like creatures that are going to be down here in the water that we can see with our own eyes. And the way we're going to do that is by using some tools to look for them down in the water. So if you look over here, I have the tools that I'll need down on the table. I have a couple different types of nets that I would use to scoop in the water, and I'll show you how we do that in a little while. You want a fine mesh net, one like this. You could get it at a local pet store, and that works great. Or I like to use a dip net like this. This is a larger one, and the mesh in the bottom of this dip net is much more fine, so it's going to keep a lot more of these small creatures in the net rather than dripping through back into the water. You want some containers to hold the creatures in, so I have little glass jars or clear buckets. Generally things that are clear or white are going to be best so you can see the creatures once you've gotten them out of your net. And then some magnifiers, because although we can see these with our own eyes, magnifying them really helps to see the details. I also have a variety of ID charts that I use to identify these creatures that I'm finding. So a field guide like this one about streams, the ecology and life in the streams or lakes, as the case may be. But I also have a couple of other macroinvertebrate identification keys and charts. Now, these macroinvertebrates, not only are they fun to look for, but they're also really important. There are lots of scientists that will study macroinvertebrates because macroinvertebrates are what we call an indicator species. And that means that the presence of certain macroinvertebrates in a body of water can indicate how healthy that water is. Because some of these creatures are very, very sensitive to pollution. So if the water is even a little bit polluted, they can't live in the water, they can't survive there. Whereas other creatures are much more pollution tolerant, and so they can live in water that is moderately to heavily polluted. So what we would hope for is that as we are looking for macroinvertebrates in our lake here, that we're going to find macroinvertebrates that fall into this sensitive category, that are sensitive to pollution, because that would indicate that we have a clean lake. So when I am searching for macroinvertebrates, like I said, I'm going to use a tool. This dip net is the one I'm going to use. Now these creatures will typically be living in the grassy area. So you can see here that we have these shrubs and grasses coming all the way down, even growing into the water. And that's what they're looking for. They take shelter in those grassy areas. And a lot of these creatures will not live their whole lives in the water, and so they stay close to the grasses because as they grow from nymph stage into their adult stage, they're going to go through a metamorphosis and they're going to emerge out of the water. But in order to do that, they need to be near something that they can climb on to get up out of the water. So that's why I'm going to be looking for macroinvertebrates in this grassy area. So I'm going to dip the net in, kind of scrape it against the bottom and some of these grasses. And then I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to take a look down in the bottom of the net and see if I can see anything moving around in there. Takes a little bit of patience. And I don't see much movement at this time. So I'm going to do another dip. Well, I've gotten a couple of freshwater snails. Oh, I saw a little movement right there. If you can see under right where my finger is, there's some small little creature moving there. So in order to find out what this is, I'm going to take it over to my table. I'm going to put it in one of those dishes, and then I'm going to try to identify it. So after looking at my ID charts, I believe that this is a young dragonfly, a very young dragonfly nymph. As this one grows, it's going to eventually become the size of the one we see in this tub here. You can see right there where my finger is. This is a large dragonfly nymph, probably just about ready to make the transition to go through the metamorphosis to become the dragonflies that you and I see flying around lakes and streams with their beautiful wings. So some other interesting things that we've found down here at the lake today. This right here is the casing. Let's see if I can get out of the dirt a little bit. The caddisfly casing. So some of these creatures build a protective casing around themselves using sticks and leaves and just whatever debris they can find in the water and make these great little sort of tubular casings for themselves. And right here on another casing, we actually have a mayfly. A mayfly nymph. I'm going to see if I can get it to come off of there a little bit so you can see him better. A mayfly nymph. So we found this one in the water as well. And this macroinvertebrate will also go through some changes just like the dragonfly and will become an adult that leaves the water, grows wings, and flies off. Earlier today, we actually had another mayfly in the water here, but it hatched. So just as we were filming this today, it hatched. So you can see it's the body that it left behind, sort of the shell of its body, and its wings came out, and it made its change all within just a couple hour period. We found a young crawdad as well. If we can get it to swim around a little bit, you can kind of see the shape of its body there. Oh, there we go. Swims around similar to a shrimp. Has kind of that curled back tail, and you can see two pinchers in front. So in my net, you'll see this little beetle-like creature here. Well, he is a beetle. We call it a riffle beetle, and I'll show you what it looks like when he's in the water. In here you can see some things moving around that look like little shrimp almost. The way they move, they kind of curl up like that. These are called scuds. These are a very common, they're like the ants of the freshwater system. They're a very common little macroinvertebrate. Almost hard to see with our eyes, but you can see the movement in there. I have an identification chart here that sorts the macroinvertebrates by their pollution tolerance. So we have some that are pollution tolerant. We have others that are moderately tolerant, and then we have others that are sensitive. So based on what we have found today, we have found a few species that fall into this pollution tolerant category, like scuds and whirligig beetles. But we also found some species that fall into the moderately tolerant category, like mayflies and stoneflies, and the crawdad that we found So I think it's pretty safe to say that our lake is moderately healthy as far as pollution goes. Our lake does have a lot of color to it. It's a very dark lake because we're surrounded by deciduous trees all along the border. When trees lose their leaves, the leaves release a chemical called tannin, and tannin is a brown color, and so that tannin gets released into the water, making the water in our lake very brown. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's unhealthy. It just has a lot of tannin in it. It is also slightly turbid water. There's lots of particles of silt and sand in our water as well. But based on our chart, I think we can say that the water in our lake here is moderately healthy. Next time you find yourself down at a freshwater lake or stream, keep your eyes out for all kinds of interesting creatures. You never know what you might find. The ones that we found today are just a small sampling of some of the macroinvertebrates that you may find. So have fun, keep your eyes open, and be safe.